to Promote, Profit, Publish. I'm your host, Juliet Clark, and it's just me today, but we're going to talk about a very important topic that every author, every book, everybody, even writers before your book is out, should be considering and taking a look at and budgeting for. But before we get started, I want to remind you about our sponsor for the show, LifeWave. You know, if you're someone who's very holistic, tired of medicine all the time, but maybe getting a little bit older, aging, and tired of the pain, LifeWave has a patch for you. I personally use the X39. I love it. I'm super athletic at 63 years old, but with all that athleticism comes a whole lot of pain. So I want you guys to check out this product. It's no doctor. So there's no pills. There's nothing you put in your body. Everything, it's a patch. It's outside of your body. So if you want to know more about this, go over to calendly.com/thefoolishcouple/superbrand and talk to our sponsor, Andy Nam, about signing up for LifeWave today and getting yourself out of pain and feeling much better as you're aging. So today we are going to talk about blog tours and podcast tours and why podcast tours are overtaking blog tours as the big thing that authors do. So in the past, blog tours have been a big thing. You go, and if you don't know what a blog tour is, you find someone with a blog that is in a similar category as your book, and you ask them if you can write a 500 to 1,000 word article. And this has been a really effective way to get the word out about your book up until about 2 or 3 years ago, and has slowly transitioned into podcast tours instead. Now, podcast tours are harder to get booked, and here's the main reason why. With a blog tour, I can have a blog on my website and pretty much no money, no expenses. It doesn't matter who writes it. I don't have any out of pocket for those. So I don't have to ask anybody on a blog tour to pay because there's really nothing out of my pocket, although a lot of people do pay for blog tours. So basically, somebody's having you on to plug your book, and more than likely, you're paying for that. Now, podcast tours are much, much better alternative. And one of the main reasons is you get to be on. You're live or you're recorded, and people get to see your personality. It's usually a 20 to 45-minute interview. They get to see, do they like you? Do they like the way you present the material? Do they like the material you're presenting? And so there are a lot of factors there where, especially if you're someone who really has had a media training, that podcast tour can be amazing. One of the big mistakes that people make on podcast tours, authors who are untrained in media, is they go on and they just blab about their book. Most of the time, it's about sound bites and your expertise. So you don't want to just push your book. You want to talk about your expertise as well, because as I've mentioned many, many times, you probably aren't going to make ROI back on your book, what you sunk into your book. Where you will get it back is in those high ticket items. So you want to be able to come across in sound bites, in expertise, and be able to promote your book at the same time. I'm going to give you a great example. A couple of years ago, I recommended one of my clients to a very big podcast that's out there. And the host came back to me afterwards and she said, "You need to recommend that your client go to media training." And I was like, "Why?" And it turned out that every time the podcaster asked a question about the book, the author said, "Oh, well, you'll have to buy the book and read it." That is not what we want to hear. You are there because you're an expert in something and you've written a book about it. So you do want people to buy the book, but you don't want to be buy the book, buy the book, buy the book. And I know you've seen those people on social media. So one of the other benefits of a blog, of the podcast versus the blog tour is not only are you live, but with that blog tour, you have about 500 to 1,000 words to articulate what you want to say. It's really hard to get a personality shining through. There's no interaction. There's no question. There's no pushback. And I think that's the most interesting part of being a podcaster is you get to ask people questions about it. You get to really dive deep. And that's something I know my magazine contributors complain about all the time, like, I had to write that in 500 words and it was really hard to explain. So the podcast tour gives you an opportunity to be able to really articulate and draw out and share more of your expertise. Now, other benefits of a podcast. One of the things we do here is every time that I'm on a podcast, if I'm on another person's podcast, I will ask permission because they always want you to promote. Can I run the video through Opus? Can I pick up clips? So you can actually use your podcast tour to create really amazing clips of the video or the audio to be able to sell your books as well. And so you can take this 45-minute interview and chop it up into, 10, 15 promotional spots, not only for the podcaster who's just had you on, but for you and your book. So really, really amazing. Now, a podcast tour there are two ways to go here. And we haven't really promoted them much in the past. We do now because we've got somebody who is a great provider. Our provider on the podcast tours is now Simon & Schuster's former publicity team. So we know that they're reading the book. We know they're placing our people into places where people will be interested in their books. I've encountered podcast tours in the past where nobody reads the book. They ask the author the keywords. What are the key points? What does your speaker sheet say? And then they go and they get you on any old podcast. And that's not what we want. I actually did a podcast tour many years ago, and they put me on a brand new podcast with no established listeners. Like they got maybe 7 or 8. And I paid money to that tour producer to put me on shows where people would be interested in what I had to say. So it is you really have to thoroughly vet and ask questions of the podcasters as well, or of the podcast tour organizer. Other things to consider: if you order soon enough and you know when your book release date is, so 3-4 months in advance of your book release, the podcast tour producer can get you in pre-sale, get you exposure. If you wait until the last minute, a lot of podcasters, and I'm gonna put myself in this category too. I'm recording this in mid-April for mid-June. So if you don't book early and you just say, okay, my book is coming out in 3 weeks, let's get me booked, you're going to have a hard time pushing that book in pre-sale. And that's the best time to get it up to a bestseller status. So you really need to plan for this. You need to budget, and you need to thoroughly vet the podcast tour producer. When we talk to ours, we always take the book that we have and we go to the tour producer before we even commit to taking it to our author. And we say, where can you place a book like this? Can you place a book like this? And we've had a lot of success with that, because they'll come back and they'll say, look, we have podcasts in XYZ areas. We think they'd be a good fit. Go ahead and pitch this, and we'll start working on getting them out there and booked. And that's really what should happen. Then we send them, like I said, we send them that book. It doesn't have to be in the final format. It can still even be rough. We've sent books that are in the process of editing, because our podcast producers, actually, our tour producers, read that book. So if I hand them a speaker sheet and say, this is what the book is about, they're going to go through and make sure that that speaker sheet that probably the author has created matches what they think the book is about. And that's really important, because remember, they're using their connections, their vast connections, to get you onto the podcast that fit you. Our podcast tour producers also are able, if you buy the bigger packages, to get you on TV. They're able to get you in magazines. Sometimes they're even able to get you as speakers at conferences. So it really depends on what your goals are and how you're going to handle this. So the challenges with that are, if you try to do it yourself, are enormous, because you don't have contacts. I actually use PitchDB when I go in and book my own podcasts. And rarely do I do that. I have to mention that. More often than not, people will come to me and say, hey, we'd love to have you as a guest. But when I do have to pitch, I use PitchDB. The downside of using something like that and trying to do it yourself is that you're having to promote yourself. And a lot of times, if you don't know what you're doing, you can make some big mistakes. So cold calling, it's like cold calling. It's uncomfortable, and you have to explain to the podcaster why you would be a good fit. And that can be really hard sometimes, especially if you haven't done your homework and listened to the podcast. The second mistake we make when we try to do it ourselves, we always think, I'm going to go out and get myself on Johnny Lee Dumas or one of these other big ones. A lot of those charge, and you'd be amazed how much those people charge. You could buy an entire 20-city tour and have money left over for what some of those people charge. And the truth is, at the end of the day, you're probably not going to get what you want from that money and that one audience you're in front of. When we sell a tour, a 20-city tour, and believe me, you're not going to each of those cities, but what you are doing is you're appearing on Zoom most of the time, or StreamYard, or one of those types. But you're in 20 different cities. Now you have exposures to 20 different audiences. They may not be as big as that one person's, but you may spark some interest in one of those 20 audiences, or all of those 20 audiences, depending on what your topic is. So I would highly recommend looking into the podcast tours. Like I said, our person that we have doing them now is a former Simon & Schuster booker. So he has lots of contacts. And so far, the feedback we've gotten on this book marketing tool has been tremendous. So last thing, what are you going to pay for something like this? Typically, our 20-city tours run about, if you just do them a la carte, they run about $4,000. If you want the bigger packages that are usually multiple cities, magazines, they do it over 6 to 9 months. So you're spread out with your publicity. Something like that is about $10,000. Now you're probably thinking one question here. Well, why don't I just hire somebody who does publicity? Publicity is very expensive if it's not targeted. You could spend $30,000, $40,000 and not get a whole lot. Or you could go to somebody in publicity who will write an article for you and pitch it. Typically, that is $6,000, $7,000 now too. I know one of our vendors does it for $7,500. So this is really the most economical way to get the book out, to get get your publicity out there with your book. Let me tell you another side of this. Most people do all the publicity before the book comes out. So they're building their platform, and then they get to that bestseller list, and then it just stops. They never sell a book again. And the downside of that is when you're over on Amazon, most people don't go past that second page. So if you've dropped to 3,000 in a particular category, nobody's ever going to find you. So this keeps the steady stream of books selling and you up in the ranking, because book sales are part of it. Another part of this is you can get on and ask for reviews. So maybe give a gift. If you go out and buy my book and you provide the receipt and you've written a review, I will send you a free gift. That's a great way to get reviews, because once your book is released, usually it's a combination of purchases and reviews. So that's how it works with the algorithm. So you want to make sure that you are still top of mind after that book is released and you're consistently selling books. If you want to know more about our book tours and what we're doing with our Simon & Schuster partners, our former Simon & Schuster partners, I shouldn't misrepresent that, reach out to me at juliet@superbrandpublishing.com. and let us know that you're interested, and we'll set up a call and see if your book is a good fit for our people. All right, you guys, thanks for tuning in, and have a beautiful day.